we have two wonderful ladies with us here today, but more on that. We'll give a few minutes for more people to join us, and then we'll start a program. All right, guys, so we'll wait for a minute more for our students and guests to join us, and then we will be starting. Thank you for your patience, Bridget and Sarah.
That we're hearing a little bit about where everybody is from.
Yeah, it's an interesting mix, isn't it? There's Philippines, India, Pakistan, Egypt, Jeddah, Dubai, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Nigeria.
So welcome to all these wonderful people from across the globe. Welcome to our program, and we shall be starting now in exactly 30 seconds. Okay. So today we have with us two wonderfully, amazingly talented ladies, Bridgette Morehouse and Sarah Kivel. They're here to teach us about and tell us about more about emotional intelligence. And I'll give you a brief background to each one so we understand them and the work better. Bridgette Morehouse is an experienced global executive, leadership coach, facilitator, consultant with a track record of innovation in several Fortune 20 companies. As Chief Learning Officer of Ford Motor Company, Bridgette integrated emotional intelligence and mindfulness skills into curricula aimed at developing leaders for today's complex and uncertain world of work, the VUCA world as you call it. Bridgette is a Goleman Emotional Intelligence Associate, EI coach, and member of the Goleman EI Coaching Advisory Board. Through her coaching, she explores the connection between emotional intelligence and adult development. She's also on the board of the Institute of Organizational Mindfulness and has served as adjunct faculty for Mindful Leader. Welcome, Bridgette, to our program. We are so happy to have you here. Joining us today is also Sarah Kivel. Sarah is a leadership and performance coach based in the San Francisco Bay Area. She's a meta coach and a member of the faculty and advisory board at Goleman EI. Sarah works with CEOs, entrepreneurs, and leaders from all over the world on emotional intelligence coaching and focus training. She is also the founder of the nonprofit organization EI Focus. Here, she trains athletes, coaches, and athletes on the skills of emotional intelligence so that they can become leaders in sport and in life. Wonderful work. So happy to have you here, Sarah.
Thank you so much.
And I will give the stage to you to begin your presentation. We'll be hosting our Q&As in the middle and towards the end also. Please take the program forward from now.
Hey, thank you, Samina. Thank you so much for the introductions. I'm just going to go through the topics that we're going to cover today and then hand it off to Sarah, who will get us started. But I understand there's a lot of folks on the call that you're all either coaches or you're in the program to become coaches. And so therefore, a lot of you probably have a good background and understanding in what emotional intelligence is. But we're just going to go through that quickly with what is the Goleman model about emotional intelligence, and then really kind of try to tailor it from a coaching perspective and touch on the topics of self-awareness and emotional balance or emotional regulation, and how those are so important for us as coaches. And then how can we use those foundational skills to shift into our relationships with other people, with clients, and then kind of wrap up with a little bit around listening and why that's so important, obviously, in our role as coaches, but we'll talk about that from an EI, an emotional intelligence perspective a little bit. So let me go ahead and hand it to Sarah, who's going to go through the first part of the deck, and I'll come back in a little bit later. And then we'll wrap it up, as Samina mentioned, with questions at the end.
Thank you so much, Bridgette. Really excited to be here with all of you from very different parts of the world, and it's wonderful. And I'm here from San Francisco with you today. And I would love to just start off by asking all of you, what what does emotional intelligence mean to you? And feel free to put it in the chat. There's many, we hear this term in the news, out there in our coaching world, and sometimes we wonder, okay, I understand, but what is it really? So I'm reading here, empathy, yes, definitely. It's a big part of emotional intelligence. The ability to read and understand emotions, emotional safety, emotional regulation, being in control of your emotions, yes. Mind regulator, balancing emotions with logic, to better understand ourselves and manage how we interact with others and understand each other's feelings and how we deal with them. Yes, definitely. The intelligence you can learn, being in control, how I understand feeling, a balance of managing and understanding emotion, unselfing, I love that term, awareness of self and your environment, managing emotions with empathy and control. Yes, these are all just very great definitions of emotional intelligence. And Bridgette, why don't we move to the next slide? This is one of the definitions that I like to use. It's the ability to recognize what you're feeling and understand how your emotions affect your performance and your relationships. So it's that ability to tune into oneself, and we're going to get into a bit about self-awareness because that is at the heart of emotional intelligence. So being able to understand your feelings, your emotions, and how you show up first, really, in order to then be able to connect with others, because it's very difficult to be able to identify emotions in other people if we can't understand our own. Anything else, Bridgette, that you would add to that?
I don't think so at the time. And because we will expand on everything you just said in the next few slides. So
yes, and I'm seeing some more here in the chat. Awareness of self and your environment, to be able to name your emotions based on your understanding. And we're going to do a little exercise around that today. Understanding the emotional needs of others. Yes. Yes, thank you. So let's move on.
I think Adijat has the book, because you're going to name the slide will be on in about 2 slides. I think you.
That's right.
Want me to go ahead?
Yes, please.
Okay.
I'd like to just share a little bit about the research. Today, we are talking about the Goleman EI model of emotional intelligence, and I would love to share just a little bit about the research behind the model, Dan Goleman's model of emotional intelligence. So there was research done on what makes for high performers in organizations. What is it about these leaders? Because at some point, leaders have education or certifications. They're technically savvy. They understand what they're doing. But then there's these leaders that somehow people really want to be around them. They're able to motivate others. They inspire others to work hard. People just want to be with them. And what is it about these leaders that make others feel this way? And what the research revealed was that these were the traits of emotional intelligence, and we're going to get into the details of those different skills. So it was the difference between high performing leaders, those that are at the top, versus those that were really great. So that maybe that top 20%. And when you look at this chart here, the traits of high performers in jobs of all kinds, emotional intelligence has a lot to do with why there's success. But when you look in leadership roles, clearly the emotional intelligence skills make up the vast majority of the traits that are characteristic of these high performers. And so we can move on. We're going to talk a little bit about those skills. What exactly does that mean? What are those traits? Some of you may be familiar with this model of emotional intelligence, and we're going to spend just a little bit of time here going through this. These are the 4 domains of emotional intelligence, and it starts with self-awareness, and then we move into self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. And I'll just spend a little bit of time on each of these domains to explain. I mentioned earlier when we were talking about the definition of emotional intelligence, and that it really starts with us. It starts with how we see ourselves, how we are we aware of our own emotions, how in touch with our feelings are we, and our values and those things that motivate us. So this is the foundation of emotional intelligence, and this is where in our trainings we spend a lot of time here working on developing self-awareness. Once we've developed self-awareness, we are able to then, okay, I understand how I'm feeling, and now, okay, I get it, and now how do I want to show up? How am I going to manage myself? Because we need, in order to manage ourselves, we first need to identify those emotions. How are we feeling? So now we move into, okay, this is how I want to show up. I have choices. When we talk about self-management, we talk about emotional balance. So emotional regulation, I heard that in the chat. How do we manage our emotions, especially under pressure and under stress? But even positive emotions can get us off track sometimes when we're really excited. So how do we manage that? How do we stay in check with ourselves when we show up in relationships? How adaptable are we? And actually, I'd like to, and I think as I go through this, maybe we can all mute. Thank you. We'll talk about this from it's one thing from a leadership, but we are in this audience here. We are coaching. We are leaders in our coaching practice. So I'm going to try to use some examples of how this might show up for you as a coach. And so that emotional balance, how are you showing up to your coaching sessions with your clients? Are you checking in? I know for me, it's very important that I'm not racing to my coaching call. I need to get to my call so that I have a moment to check in with myself, to focus on what it is I'm doing so that I can be completely present in those conversations. Adaptability would be, how can we go with the flow? Sometimes we want to have, we want things to go a certain way, and maybe they don't. Maybe, for instance, you know, our Wi-Fi goes out. I had that happen. My Wi-Fi goes out in the middle of a brand new coaching conversation. Oh my goodness. And I noticed that I'm frazzled, but I have to adapt to the situation and gain my composure so that we can move on. Positive outlooks. Again, sometimes things aren't going the way we want them to. And so how are we looking at this situation? Can we look at it with with positivity? Positivity is that thing that can fuel us, that gives us energy. And it's a great check-in. And we have a choice of how we look at our situation too. And so creating that ability to look for the good, look for the positive in the situation. And then achievement orientation or goal setting for ourselves as coaches too. When we think of our practice, for instance, how do we, what is it that we are trying to achieve for ourselves as coaches? Is that in line with our coaching practice and the values that we hold around coaching? How do we want our practice potentially to look? Who are the clients we want to work with? And are we in line with that? Are our actions in line with the goals that we're setting for ourselves? As we then manage ourselves, we work on our self-awareness, we move into self-management, and then we're able to bring these skills to how we relate to others, our clients, for instance. Empathy being the ability to put ourselves in another person's shoes, to cognitively understand how they feel. And this is so key for a coach to be able to do this so that we can really be there with our clients. Sometimes we might even feel what they're feeling. And here it's another check-in. Okay, am I feeling so much what they're feeling that I'm losing sight of where I should be as a coach? Do I need to potentially think about my boundaries as a coach? Because it's hard. Sometimes we hear some difficult stories and we can find ourselves emotionally going into those stories. But being able to check in with yourself as you're checking in with your client, how can you balance this? Organizational awareness being the ability to look at the situation potentially of your client as a whole. They're an individual and they're also part of something greater. So how can you understand this greater, have this greater awareness of where your client is in their world? And then relationship management. How are you showing up as a coach? How are you influencing your client? And potentially when things, I'm looking at the conflict management, sometimes can be what might be considered conflict with our clients. And how are you managing that? Are you looking at it again with that empathetic eye? Are you thinking of yourself? What is happening for you in these situations when you notice that there might be some conflict coming up in the relationship? Are you inspiring your client? This is a big part of being a coach. How are you inspiring your client to reach the goals that they have set for themselves? And teamwork, working as a team with your client, and in whatever way it is that works for you in your coaching practice. And finally, coach and mentor, and especially coach in this model. How are you showing up as coach? Sometimes we might find ourselves moving into the consultant area. Is that something that you have decided you want to practice? And have you defined that for your client? Are you showing up as a coach in the way that you have set up and explained to your client? So these are the 12 skills of emotional intelligence. And today we're especially going to focus in on self-awareness and self-management, being at the heart of emotional intelligence. Any questions? I know we're going to have Q&A at the end, but anything coming up for anybody before we move on?
I'll just jump in here too, Sarah, just to kind of, I think you touched on it, but just to reiterate, if you look at the first two domains, self-awareness and self-management, we think of those as the foundational skills because it's so critical before you have really effective relationships with anyone. The green and the blue, the social awareness and relationship awareness is the relationship skills. But before you're really effective at doing that, the people that are the most effective at doing that also have very strong foundational skills, which are about their internal situation, their internal experience, and building that self-awareness and self-management, understanding how you're showing up, what's happening for you, and how that's affecting the relationship. Because it's the only thing that we really have that we can control is how we show up for the other person. And so that's why we spend so much time, and we're going to talk about that more today. It's just about the building that capability is so important to have high quality relationships with others. The other thing I was going to say that Sarah mentioned too is all of these skills can be learned. And that's very empowering for people, right? Who might think, oh, I just don't have good emotional intelligence. I'm very good with the cognitive skills. I'm smart. I can understand books. I understand math, but I'm not good at emotional intelligence. You know, there's people who might think that. And the good thing is all of these are skills that can be learned with practice. And the other thing that we advocate within Goleman EI, and that we know through studies and research, is that when people have a coach to build these skills, they're even more effective in learning these capabilities and these skills.
Yes, thank you so much, Bridgette, for adding that. It is liberating to many people to hear that these skills can be learned, because we do. Many people think I'm either born this way or I'm not. So I think we're ready for the next slide. Actually, on that note, it's a perfect segue into our next slide. So I'm guessing this might be a familiar slide for many of you here. But really, this is what we're working with when we talk about emotional intelligence. We can see behavior on the top of the surface. This is what shows up, but we can't begin to change that behavior until we look at what's underneath. And that essentially is emotional intelligence. What are your values? So again, these are elements of self-awareness. What is it that's important to you? And are you living, and as a coach, are you in alignment with those values? What are your beliefs and your mindset, growth mindset? What is your mindset? Are you stuck in your ways? Do you always do things a certain way? Are you open to change? Where are you? And how do those beliefs and your mindset and your habits, the things, it's easy for us to get on autopilot too, especially we're so busy these days and we are distracted, and we can easily get in autopilot and keep doing the same thing without thinking about it. So checking in with those habits that might be affecting your behavior as a coach, might be affecting how you show up. But these are also things to identify or to have conversation around with your clients. And so these are those things that are underneath the surface that take some real deep work, and ultimately affect what happens above, those behaviors that others can see. So let's move on. Oh, you're on mute, Bridgette.
Yeah, okay. I'm just gonna mention, I'm sorry, I got lost in thinking of a little story that happened with me recently with thinking of the difference between an emotion that you might have and the behavior, that shows up. So I had taken my kids to my 7-year-old nephew's house for his birthday party 2 days ago. And we were going to bring the 7-year-old home with us and to spend the night with my sons. And everybody was very excited about it. They love spending time together. And at some point in the evening, after all of the fun and the games and the playing and the birthday cake, the 7-year-old, I think, just got overexcited, overstimulated, and got frustrated with something and hit his brother. And so then his parents were upset because the brother was crying, and then they yelled at the 7-year-old, and then the 7-year-old was even more upset, and it just kept escalating. And then the next thing you know, the parents said, no, you cannot go over and spend the night, with your aunt and your cousins. And then my son was so disappointed that he yelled at his brother, and then they got in a fight. And I, at some point in the night, I said, let's all stop, guys, and just think about this. You have a 7-year-old who's not in control of his emotions. He doesn't have self-mastery of his emotions. And he took something out on his brother. And then that spread to the parents. And then that spread to my son, that spread to my other son. And next thing you know, there were 7 people who were very angry and frustrated and crying and tears. And I almost fell into the trap myself, just because of all the emotion that was happening around me. I actually did for a few minutes. And then I was like, wait a minute, pause. I'm getting pulled into this habit of reacting to all the emotion that's going on, instead of being able to and I was luckily, after I think practicing these skills for so long, able to say, I'm getting pulled into a habit of reacting to this drama and the yelling and the kids crying, and being able to break that habit and then teach the kids around me to kind of shift that perspective and looking at it too. I was just caught in that story for a moment, so I apologize. But I wanted to say here too on habits, it's not just habits of reacting to emotions, but it's also habits of mind. It's the stories that we tell ourselves about a situation. And in coaching, it can be things like, you know, do I feel competent enough? Can I relate to this client that I have? Maybe I feel like I can't relate to them, so I'm not going to do them justice as a coach. You might have imposter syndrome, or you might have other stories that, you know, that you have in your mind that are going through your mind and impact how you're showing up for your client. So that's another way of thinking about habits. And this is why self-awareness is so important. And that kind of takes us to the next slide, but that awareness of what is your emotional state? What is the mind, the habits that you're falling into, and the mind awareness of what's happening in your mind that might be affecting how you're showing up. And so I'm not going to talk really long about these different elements of self-awareness, but there's 5 kind of categories we think about with self-awareness. But I'll just touch on them highly, because I think you guys can probably understand the concepts, but I'll just kind of go through them quickly. So there's attentional agility, and that's the ability to control where you put your attention. So are you putting your attention in the current moment? Are you able to kind of, some of you might know the phrase, go on the balcony or go on the dance floor, where you kind of can take yourself out of the immediate drama that's happening and kind of stand up above it and look at it with a detachment that allows you to kind of provide some perspective that you might not have, some discernment that you wouldn't have if you were caught up. So if I think of myself with all the kids running around like crazy, having that agility to shift my attention to kind of think about it from a different perspective. Then there's the emotional awareness, which is just the awareness of saying, I'm aware that my emotional state is X or Y. I'm aware that my emotions, that there is an emotion that I'm going to name it this. In that case with the kids, I'm going to name it frustration or irritation or anger. And that's another element of this, is the granularity to really be able to name emotions in a very precise way versus just saying it's a good emotion or bad emotion. But we know that people who can really be granular about how they label their emotions have the capability to be much more resilient. And in the workplace right now, we talk about a lot of people feeling burnout. And there have been a lot of studies that have come out in the last year that people who are really granular with naming emotions, particularly positive emotions, gratitude and joy and happiness and hope and love and, you know, positive emotions, the people who can really label that and notice that and see that in their life are much more resilient to the burnout that so many people are feeling in the world right now. Another one is interoception, which is just tuning into what your body is telling you. You know, right now, as you think about your own self, just focus in on your body. You know, think of your stomach, your diaphragm. Is it tight? Are your shoulders lifted a bit? You know, are you clenching your jaw? A lot of meditations will kind of tune in to those things and kind of point out and ask you to relax those areas of your body. There's a meditation that's a mindfulness practice, that's a body scan that teaches you to practice the awareness of how your body is showing up in that moment, and the awareness of what that body state is doing, and then connecting that to an emotional situation all ties into this emotional self-awareness. Presence of mind is another one that's really trained through a mindfulness or a meditation practice, because we know that the only place that we can control, I said a minute ago, the only thing we can control is ourselves and our reactions. It's the only time that we are really in control is right now. And making sure you're shifting your awareness or being present in the moment versus worrying about what's happened in the past, or, you know, repeating stories of things that have happened in the past, or worrying about something that might happen in the future. but being focused on what's happening right now and having the presence of mind to be able to shift into that now really gives you agency, or gives you that ownership of your experience. It helps build that experience. Some of you on the call may have heard the quote that I think attributed to Viktor Frankl that says, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom." And so just being able to bring your mind and your awareness to that present moment, understanding the emotions and everything that's happening, and building that pause or that separation between the stimulus of what's happening and how you respond is so important. And it's a huge outcome to increasing your self-awareness. And then the last one is metacognition, which is just thinking about our thinking. So it's the ability to just kind of step back and think about how we think about a certain situation. What are those habits of mind? What are those stories that we tell ourselves? How do those drive the emotions that we feel in certain circumstances? So all of those are elements of self-awareness. Then I'll go into emotional balance a little bit. So once we have this foundation of awareness that's built through mindfulness practice, it's built through reflection, it's built through really deeply understanding what is driving each of our individual experiences with emotions and with stories that we tell ourselves, and the predictions that our brains make around what's happening in the world based on our prior experiences. There's kind of three elements of emotional balance or emotional regulation. And these use the word trigger, but really if you think of the word trigger as your brain reacting to a set of stimulus, a set of experiences that have happened, and your brain is basically saying, hey, I've seen something like this happen before, and I'm going to predict that it's going to go this way. Back to the slide Sarah showed with everything under the water level with the iceberg, the habits, the stories we've told ourselves, the experiences we've had in the past. Our brain is predicting what might happen in the future, and it's taking us in a certain path. And in most cases, that has been a very self-protective thing that our brain and our bodies have done. But we call that triggering sometimes. So you have a set of stimulus and it triggers you to react in a certain way. So one way to think about this is kind of how easily those stories and those habits can control us and what we do and how we react to the world. So are we on autopilot where we don't even realize that certain things happen and it's almost a done deal? This is how I am. This is who I am. This is how I react in these circumstances. Or do we think about we have the capability to control that, to build that gap between the stimulus and the response, to be aware of our reactions? So the threshold of trigger or of emotional regulation, the threshold is kind of how easily or quickly we become triggered. So does a situation happen? And I'll tell you, in the story I said earlier about the kids at the birthday party, I can think back 5 or 10 years ago, before I started studying more about emotional intelligence, stressed out, overworked, spending too much time, not taking care of myself, not building my own self-awareness. If I had 4 kids, young teenagers running around me, boys fighting, screaming, I would not have been a very pretty mom. I would not have been a very caring, compassionate, empathetic mom. I probably would have jumped right in there and started yelling and barking orders and telling them to be quiet, go to their room or sit down, and that would have triggered very quickly in me. And I just know from practicing that has slowed down over time. I still have these urges that many people do. And And then severity is the degree to which we are triggered. So another way to think about that is the amount of kind of the energy, or how much you feel that you're taken over by the reaction when you're triggered in a situation. And what this all adds up to is basically resilience. It's how quickly we can recover from a situation. If we can manage how quickly we're triggered, and we can manage the degree to which we're triggered in a circumstance, that helps us build resilience. And we know that in general, resilience is just such an important skill nowadays. And we know that that's something, especially with the quarantines that have happened all over the world, and with COVID over the last year, businesses and everybody working from home, one thing that a lot of companies are trying to build right now is more resilience in their workforce, to be able to adapt to these changing situations, and to be able to kind of maintain some level of stability through all of the ups and downs that life throws at you, and businesses throw at you nowadays. So with those foundational skills of self-awareness and self-regulation, putting all of that together as coaches and moving from that self-awareness to awareness of others is kind of the I think the crux of the skill for us as coaches, right? So it's great for everybody to build self-awareness, self-regulation, but with us as coaches, our whole definition of what we're doing is working with other people to help them meet some sort of goal, or to move them off of where they are stuck, and kind of helping guide them, right? And so how do you kind of put all that together to move from self-awareness to awareness of others? Start with checking in with yourself, practicing that self-awareness when you're in a coaching situation. Take a moment, like Sarah said, you don't want to be rushing from a prior engagement. Take a moment to check in and see where you're carrying some emotional or physical tension, or baggage, or stress, or strain. Similarly, kind of check in with the other person. You can do that explicitly, where you ask, or implicitly, where you just kind of start to notice patterns in your interactions with the other person. Noticing the shift in their moods and their emotional states, really deep listening for the emotion behind what people are saying. And I think all of us as coaches are much more trained in doing this than kind of maybe the general population, but listening for what's not said in addition to what is said, asking questions, kind of explicitly labeling it, and then moving into the other person's emotional valence and salience. And so what that is valence is how good or bad an emotion is. So is it, it's kind of the general spectrum of the goodness or the badness of the emotion. And then the salience is how aware that the person is of their emotion. And sometimes that's like attributed to the amount of energy they have in that emotion. So if it hits a certain, if they're happy, they're mildly happy, they might not notice it. But if they're super excited and super happy, they're much more likely to notice it. And then kind of in this, we're not explicitly calling out and talking about it, but we talked about, and we saw several people call out in the chat earlier, empathy. And that's so important, to be able to tie in, to tune into the other person's emotions. And in addition to empathy, compassion. And so the way we define compassion is the unbearable urge to act on another's behalf. So it's seeing somebody in an emotional state that triggers your empathy and wanting to take action for them. And that compassion, if you think of the compassion, is the bridge that connects us to the other person. And so compassion is so important for us as coaches, because it creates that bridge. It creates that ability to connect through empathy, and it drives us to help them, to help create an action on their behalf. And I don't have a slide on it, but compassion is basically that deep listening, tuning into the emotions, the observation of the other person, which we talk about on this slide, and then the ability to be able to kind of change your story as a coach, So what is the story that we've told ourselves, maybe about the other person or about ourselves and our interaction with the other person, and being able to shift that, to check it, to shift the perspective, and to really be there to kind of just make sure that that story isn't getting in the way of building that compassionate connection with the other person. So since I mentioned that listening is so important, Sarah's got a couple slides here. We'll talk a little bit more about listening and how we can do that as coaches. I do see that there's some chat, some questions. Is there anything we should address right here before, or is it things we can talk about at the end in the Q&A?
I think that I saw a question earlier about moving from, do we need to build self-awareness before moving into self-management and social awareness and relationship management? And yes, actually, we start off with self-awareness, understanding ourselves, and then understanding how we're showing up and managing that first. Those are the foundational skills of emotional intelligence. So we start there, and then we move into the social relationship. So social awareness, being able to identify someone else and the relationships. How is this relationship between us? What's happening there? We can talk a little bit more about that in the Q&A.
Okay.
So listening skills. Listening is such an important element as coaches, as we all know, and being present with our listening, because I'm not sure about you, but I know that if for a moment I am distracted by my own thoughts or something else, a flicker of my phone or really anything, and I am off track with my client, I have lost myself. I'm lost in the conversation. I have lost where my client is. And so really honing in on our listening skills as coaches is so critical. And when we go through this slide, I'd love for you all to think about your own selves and what is the state of your listening. And we're using this metaphor of a cup. Does my cup have residue? So am I coming to conversations with maybe ideas already in my mind about how this is going to go? Maybe I've made some assumptions about my client. Oh, it's going to be the same thing again. Or, oh, I already know, about this topic. And so you're already coming in with some information that might prevent you from really being there with your client. Is your cup leaky? Are you showing up in this conversation where you hear one thing in one ear and it goes right out the other ear? You're halfway there. Maybe you're distracted by something else and you're not fully present and paying attention. Is your cup too full? Maybe this has to do with self-care. Are you exhausted? I know for me, managing my sleep and my exercise and my own personal health so that I can show up with energy to be there for my client is so critical. And so how is your own energy? Are you depleted? Are you maxed out that you have nothing left to give? Or are you feeling energized and you can be there and be present with your client? All right, we'll move to the next slide. When we think about listening, there's some of the, just expanding upon the previous slide, these are some of the common pitfalls when listening. And I would love for all of you to think about yourself as I go through these, and maybe in the chat, when you recognize something that might resonate with you, say, I notice myself doing that sometimes. You can put that in the chat, because it's work in progress. These again are skills we can build and we can be better, and we're not perfect all the time. And so confirmation bias, are we in our conversation listening for things that we already think to be true? So are we just pointing out those things? Yes, I already knew that. I thought so because I already knew that. And that moves into the next one, a know-it-all. I already know, I know. I'm not hearing anything that I don't already know. So we're closing off our minds to possibilities. Are we an empty space filler? Do we allow for silence? And as coaches, this is critical. A lot of ideas, creativity, those aha moments happen when we as coaches allow for some empty space. So are we allowing for that empty space? Are we an impatient interrupter? Do we want to interrupt constantly? Maybe with what we think we know? Do we just constantly want to interject our knowledge? Are we indifferent and apathetic? Do we care? Do we actually care what the other person is saying? Is our mind wandering? Because we are distracted. There's so much happening in life and with the world events and our families, with technology. Are we actually present here? Are we showing up as a contrarian? Do we want to say no? Are we looking at the negative, saying no, that's not how it is, and just looking to show how we know something and maybe put the other person down as a result? And that is related to fault finder. Are we looking for faults in what the other person's saying? So I'm looking in the chat, and I'm just going to read some of these comments. Know-it-all. I love that. A couple of know-it-alls in the group. Impatient interrupter, mind wanderer. I have my issue with my client and she is not coming to awareness. Mind wandering, impatient interrupter. So here I'm seeing a pattern here. There's the mind wandering, which is prevalent today just because of all of our different distractions. So thank you all for sharing. And again, this is also building on our self-awareness, just tuning into yourself and being able to say, yes, my mind wanders when I'm listening. That is self-awareness in itself, that recognition that this is happening, and there are skills and tools we can put into play and check-ins we can do when we're in conversations to build these skills. Okay, I see we're getting close to our time, so let's move on to the next slide. As we wrap up today, and we've talked about this earlier, Bridgette talked about interoception and that ability to name your emotions. I love the term name it to tame it. I work with executives and CEOs and elite athletes, and I love that concept of naming it to tame it. When we can name our emotions, we are better able to manage what happens next. And one way to learn how to name your emotions, we first need to identify that they're there, is to do a body scan. It's a check-in with the body. The physical body can give us a lot of information. For instance, when I show up in front of a big group, either webinar, in person, in like the good old days, I noticed that my heart would start to race. And for me, after having that happen several times, it was a check-in. Okay, my heart is racing. That is a clue that maybe I'm feeling a little bit nervous. And that is my signal to, okay, pause and take a couple breaths before you proceed. Because if I don't, that nervousness when it comes to public speaking can take over. I might forget what I'm supposed to say. So for me, it's critical to tune in, recognize, okay, nervous, pause, take a few breaths, and then proceed. But I wouldn't know that that was happening unless I was paying attention. So we're going to go through an exercise here together, just briefly. And I'd like for all of you to just sit up, if you're seated or standing, whichever is most comfortable for you, feet on the ground, sitting up nice and tall or standing so your shoulders are up over your hips. And we'll start off by taking a couple breaths here. And we're going to bring the awareness to the top of your head. And now you can either keep your eyes open or you can close your eyes, whichever is most comfortable for you. I would invite you to keep your eyes open here. I suggest this because so much of our life and our work, we're working with clients, our eyes are open. And sometimes we just need a little check-in, a tool to use that we can keep all to ourselves, and we can keep our eyes open and tap into our bodies at the same time. So starting at the top of your head, we're going to work our way down to the toes. So bring the attention to the forehead and your eyes, and just name how that part of your body is feeling. And maybe it's just one word. For me, maybe my eyes are feeling a little tired. It's early morning still. And working your way down to the nose, the mouth. Is the jaw, how's your jaw feeling? Work your way down the neck into the shoulders. Using one word to name the different parts. So let's just open our awareness a little bit and move down both of the arms. So the top of the shoulders, working your way down the elbows to the elbows, the forearms and the hands. And notice when your mind starts to wander off. Many of us are mind wanderers. So the fact that you're noticing that the mind is wandering, you are building your skill right there. You're building your skill of being present and focused. So notice that it's happening and bring the attention right back to the body. Let's bring the attention back up towards the chest and work our way down towards the belly and hips and down the legs, the front of the legs. Let's go down the front, your thighs, your knees, and your shins, the ankles and the tops of the feet. Just noticing how these different parts are feeling. And then let's work our way back up the backside. So noticing, what do the bottom of the feet feel like? How does it feel to have your feet touching the ground, and the heels, your calves, the back of the legs and your hamstrings, the low back. How's your posture? Checking in. Your upper back and your shoulders. And then let's bring the attention back to the heart. What are you feeling right now? Maybe name 2 emotions. And then before we come back together as a group, just take a moment and notice what this exercise felt like for you. It was quick, but it's a quick little check-in that you can do to begin to notice how you're feeling, to name the emotions, to build that self-awareness. And with that, I invite all of you to come back to the group, and we have a few more minutes here. I would maybe in the chat, you can chat. What was that like for you? Ask any questions that you might have.
While people are typing, I wanted to just jump in here with a comment around one of the chats that was mentioned earlier that Rama mentioned. I have issues with my client because she's not coming to awareness. And I wanted to just kind of make the point there that that's an outstanding opportunity. And all of us have probably had similar stories as coaches where you might have that type of a situation. And that's an excellent opportunity for you as a coach to check in with how that drives your emotional experience. It can be very easy to get frustrated or impatient with the client. Say, why aren't they seeing this? Or just get insecure. You know, am I not making a big enough impact on that person? Like, and just second guessing yourself. And that's an example of where a situation with the client can drive an emotional response in us as a coach that could very easily drive a different way for us to show up with that client in the next meeting. So if you're going into that meeting, you're already frustrated or impatient or insecure, you're going to act a certain way. If you take a moment, you recognize that emotion in yourself, and you can ask yourself, am I showing up with them in a different way that's driven by that emotion? Or am I really showing up in the best way to help serve them in what they need? It's just a question, it's a reflection that you can do with yourself, but I wanted to just mention that as people were getting their questions to the group.
Thank you. I see
I think Eddie had his hand raised. Eddie, would you like to ask a question? Please go ahead. No, you're muted. You're on mute. Soham, would you be unmuting him, please?
Okay. Thank you. Today's meeting is also very rewarding. I've been following since we started, and I hope that I will follow to the end. Uh, well, a very quick one. Usually, we feel like we are emotional Superman, as if nothing gets at you. But I had an encounter, an experience that is kind of reshaping me now. Just a few weeks ago, I made okay, I had an experience with somebody who works around me, and that experience got me so angry. I cannot remember the last time in the last couple of years, say 20 years. In the last 20 years, I just cannot imagine myself getting that angry. But I never, for once, let my emotions take over me. So the whole thing was just pounded inside. You know, at a point, I thought, okay, I've been able to get over it. But I discovered a week later, I started having this shaking right inside of my body. At a point, I was bothered if I was having a health condition, tremor, and from tremor you begin to suspect stroke and all of that. So I was just wondering what was going on with me. At that point, I needed also to talk to somebody else who would do my kind of job on me. I found me a close associate, and I was just expressing myself, and he did not actually identify what my problem was. But afterwards, he said to me that I was emotionally drained, that he would term my condition as emotional bankruptcy, that what happened to me cleared my emotional account to zero. You know, I started relating with what he said. So I said, well, I have done this, but let me just see my doctor also. So I checked up with my doctor. He gave me a series of tests, and all the tests came out negative. But finally, I did not know that I was suffering anxiety disorder without just any other difference. I was relating well with my environment, with the people around me, with my clients, with my colleagues, my co-workers. Everything was normal, but there was something inside that was just not fitting. So when I considered attentional agility, emotional awareness, I played all that out, but something was still not right inside. And I started feeling maybe I am not that kind of Superman, that the job requires, but some frisky, fragile human being like any other person I'm trying to help. So
I would love to spend an hour kind of going through a coaching discussion with you on this. I think it's really interesting. But one thing that it's making me think of is I think so many of us believe, or our workplaces have led us to believe, that having emotions, showing emotions is not appropriate. And that's not what we're trying to say with emotional regulation at all.
yeah,
We are emotional beings. We have emotions and we have to honor those emotions. And what we find a lot is people who try to stuff those emotions down, to not express them, to not show them, it does show up in other ways that are not really functional for the situation that you're in. And so self-regulation is about really recognizing and honoring those emotions, but finding the proper outlet for them as well. And so that's what we do in emotional intelligence coaching, is kind of work with clients to kind of understand what that could look like for them. That's one of the things that we could do. And there's probably, just a point that I wanted to make, because I didn't want to leave this call with people thinking emotional management or emotional regulation just meant trying to not show emotions, or just trying not to experience them. Because that's what society has made us kind of think is the appropriate thing. That's not what we were trying to communicate at all. I know we're kind of over time. I know there's another hand up or two. How do you want to handle the questions?
Yeah, go ahead. Is that okay with you, Sarah and Bridgette? So
I'm fine.
we had 2 hands raised. Who would like to go next? Please go ahead.
Sylvie, I see Sylvie's hand is up.
Hello, everybody. Hello.
Hi, we can hear you.
Okay, my question goes thus. The first one is, what do you do when you have more than one of those pitfalls when listening to your client? And the second one goes, is it possible to also use these skills of emotional intelligence for group coaching? That's all.
Can you repeat the first question?
The first question is this. You asked us to do a little exercise, and some of us discovered pitfalls when listening. Some said impatient, interrupter, mind wanderer, and all that. So what happens when you experience more than one or two of those pitfalls when listening to your client? Is it a common feeling? Is it okay? Is it normal? Or is there something we can do so that it doesn't happen again? And the second question is, I know this emotional intelligence skill will be very good for one-on-one coaching, but is it also possible to use it for group coaching as well? That's my question.
Sure. And this quick answer on number 2 is yes, group coaching definitely works. And then the question around the pitfalls, the listening pitfalls, the fact that you are recognizing is already working towards making that issue no longer an issue. And so one quick thing for me, for instance, when I notice potentially my mind wandering, or I'm stuck on, oh, I'm going to ask this question, and in the meantime, I've lost my client, is bringing my attention to my feet on the ground, actually. It's a quick way to get grounded and very present in your conversation quickly before your mind starts to go somewhere else. So quick check in. Oh, my mind is wandering. I'm going to bring the attention to right here, right now. And that is being grounded in this moment. And I can focus my attention on my client.
Okay, thank you very much.
We had another hand raised. Please go ahead with your question. We have a few minutes for that.
Bridgette, do you want to forward the slide while we're here in case people have questions and they can reach out directly to our emails? They're a little small, but I can, if we don't have time to answer all the questions, please feel free to reach out directly to us.
There's one question in the chat, difference between emotions and feelings in terms of coaching.
Bridgette?
Sorry, I was thinking I was muted. Yeah, so, you know, I hadn't really had that specific question, but I think of them as interchangeable. So emotions is same as feelings. It's just, I think that when we talk about emotional intelligence, it's building a bit more capability around. To me, the word feeling seems a little bit transient, that it's something that might just pop up and then is gone. I don't know if that's scientific or not. But emotional intelligence, emotional self-awareness, emotional regulation, to me, that just seems like there's a bit more capability building and skill building around that we can do. I don't really think there's a big distinction. I think the words are interchangeable, though. For all intents and purposes.
I had a question, and I don't know how relevant it's going to be, but I did read up some time back about, so you have a stimulus and you have an emotion, and then you have a somatic response, correct? But there are studies to show that it's the stimulus and then there's a somatic response causing that emotion.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what would your take be on that?
Yeah, there's a whole theory around the vagus nerve and how that maybe past trauma has affected your bodily, your somatic reactions to the emotions that you feel. And it all still comes down to the iceberg slide that Sarah showed. So all of these are the things that are happening below the surface. You know you have an emotion, but you may not realize that that emotion is driven by a somatic body response. So something has happened in your environment. Let's say, I don't know. Let's say the situation with my kids at the birthday party, right? They're yelling, and I have a body somatic reaction where I get tense, my shoulders go up, I can feel my hands clenching, my stomach gets tight. I'm like, oh, I don't like these kids screaming. It's creating kind of tension in me. It's a somatic body response. It's the vagus nerve putting my body into the sympathetic nervous system is taking over. It's going into fight or flight, right? We've talked in the past, you might have heard the phrase amygdala hijack. So the amygdala, or the center part of your brain, is kind of the common thinking is that takes over. It creates cortisol, the stress hormone, which gets your body in a fight or flight type of a situation. That's the somatic body reaction, right? And so that can still happen. And then the more you have become practiced with recognizing that reaction, being aware of that interoception, the awareness of how your body is feeling, the awareness of the stories that you have told yourself about when all of those body reactions combine. I know that means that I'm irritated or I'm frustrated. I'm in a fight or flight situation. I might not be thinking clearly. It's much more easy to go into an automatic response. And so it is harder in a lot of cases to step in between, to break that automatic process of how you might respond. But it's not impossible. And that's where the mindfulness exercises, the awareness of your body, the awareness of kind of just thinking about how you've reacted. We recommend journaling so that people can reflect on their emotional situations and their emotional states when things have happened, what triggered them, why it triggered them, how they reacted to that, how they might react differently in the future. And building that capability really does help create that bigger space to allow you to react differently in the future. It's been shown through the studies with the vagus nerve and the neurology that mindfulness and that awareness that you can build through exercises like the body scan that Sarah took us through meditation in all different kinds of, religions or practices, whether it's non-religious or religious, all of that can really help build that capability.
Thank you so much, Bridgette. That was really beautifully explained. And I'm sure it's going to be helpful to a lot of people and a lot of coaches here. One last question before we quickly just tie it up. There's a question from an attendee. How would you use EI and IQ and convert to EQ?
I don't know if you can convert IQ to EQ, but they're complementary skills, right? So there's cognitive problem solving that IQ helps with. And then there's just your emotional life experience, how you experience emotions and how you react to them and how that impacts your relationships with other people. And you have to to be the most effective in work or in life or in the situations that a lot of our clients bring to us about where they're stuck. I think you really have to be able to do both. One of the reasons I like working in the emotional intelligence space is after a career of 30 years in the corporate world, where so much of that has been focused on IQ, and so much of that has been around solving cognitive problems, and holding down any emotions that you might have. Emotions are not right, it's not appropriate at work, all these things, the messages you hear, is really being appreciative of that is really what makes us who we are as humans. That's one of the big differentiators of us as a species is emotions, how we manage emotions, and how we build these social relationships with other humans. And appreciating that and honoring that is really important to, like Sarah showed at the beginning of the slide, to really be effective in work and as leaders in the workplace, is to have both, to be smart, to solve problems well, to be creative, but also to have appreciation for other people, for what experiences they're going through, and for yourself as well, and managing that effectively.
And just before we wrap up here, I would love to just say that these skills this is lifelong learning. It's not like we go do this and we check it off the box and we're done.
Yeah.
This is constant learning forever. And it's the most fulfilling, I'd say, from my experience. It's incredibly fulfilling and rewarding work, but it never ends. And so it's a life journey.
That was beautifully said. Thank you so much. And in the interest of time, sorry for not answering more questions. You have the emails for Sarah and Bridgette. You are free to contact them and email them with your queries. There might be a few left, and apologies for that because we are really over time now. So thank you so much, Bridgette and Sarah. It was a highly informative session. It was beautifully done, and I'm sure we're all much wiser and much more higher in our EQ, at least in our awareness quotient of what we do not know and what we further need to know and do for our clients, or generally as human beings. Thank you for contributing to our awareness today. It was lovely having all of you here, and we'll call it a wrap tonight. Thank you to all the participants. Thank you for your questions and for attending. You can pick up the social media leads on our chat and then connect later as you like. Thank you so much. All right, have a great night. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.